Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this discussion about India's union budget announcements, where we're trying to understand what fiscal year 2023-24 holds for the Indian economy, and to decipher how the Finance Ministry policy announcements will affect various sectors of the economy. We have a panel of experts who really don't need introductions, but I will proceed anyway. We'll start with Mr. Amarjeet Sinha, who was still recently an advisor to the PMO and is well known as India's former secretary for the Ministry of Rural Development. Mr. Sinha, who shaped crucial policies for India like Manrega and the spread of women's self-help groups, among many others, is currently also heading a panel to recommend reforms for the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Welcome, sir. Dr. Charan Singh is the non-executive chairman of the Punjab and Sindh Bank, and he was faculty and RBI professor at the IIM Bangalore. He has held senior positions at the IMF and RBI, and Dr. Singh currently also heads the Delhi-based eGrow Foundation. Welcome. Dr. Praveen is professor at JNU Center for Economic Studies and Planning, and is also the chairperson, Center for Informal Sector and Labor Studies. His work is known to all of those who have been following India's economic policy, especially on agriculture and labor reforms. We are really pleased to have you here, sir. Thank you. And finally, we have Teresa John, who is the deputy head of research and lead economist at Mumbai-based Nirmal Bank Securities. She looks closely at the financial sector regulation and infrastructure sector. A very warm welcome. If I may now request all of you to please take about 5 minutes each to share your views on the budget. And we'll start with you, Mr. Sinha. I request you all to please keep it to 5 minutes so that we can come back to you with clarifications for our second round. So we'll start with Mr. Sinha and then move on to you, Dr. Singh, and then Professor Jha, and then to Teresa. Please, Mr. Sinha.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and do remind me at 5 minutes because I'm not very good at keeping time.
Sure.
But to begin with, I think before commenting on the budget, from the economic survey, some of the points they were making, while agreeing with most of them, but on one, and that has to do with the title of the first chapter itself, which has talked about having reached, that it is time for moving on, and that it is that we have already reached that initial recovered fully, so to say. And that my own learnings from the field. Recently, I've had a chance to travel to 8-9 states, looking at various and in different parts of the country. Somehow the post-COVID challenges have been serious, much as the multi-dimensional poverty index as brought out by the UN did show that 415 million people came out of poverty. But it is also true that a very large number still remained poor, multidimensionally, plus the fact that the World Bank report had pointed out that many slipped into poverty again because the gains were fragile, as pointed out by the State of Inequality report also brought out by the Niti Aayog, which had said that if you earn 25,000 rupees per month, you actually are in the first 10%. Only to show some of the challenges of inequality. Having said that, yes, it is true that in terms of the asset base of the poor, the asset base of the poor is much better today than it was, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What the multidimensional poverty index captured in terms of access to toilets, access to pakka housing, access to electricity, access to... This shows up in the National Family Health Survey as well. Having said that, employment and incomes remained a challenge. While the asset base improved, and clearly there are linkages, when asset base improves, it does improve the ability of a household to demand public services. The collectives of women, that's another major development of these last 15 years. The collectives of women more so after 2011 when the livelihood mission was launched, but more so in terms of the expansion over the last 8-9 years. With 85 million women in the livelihood mission in rural areas, with about 3.3 million elected leaders of panchayats, 43% of whom are women, there was this community connect which was there for a large number of programs, and some of these programs were implemented in that partnership with local governments, with frontline workers, with concerned ministries, whether it was the Ujjwala program, whether it was the gas connection, the electricity connection under Saubhagya, whether it was the LED bulb distribution. Many of these programs were actually community, the connect was very strong. Central, state, and local governments were working together, and that actually made a difference. The clearly, whatever that I wrote on the budget, my understanding was it was time now to try similar partnerships in human development, because the lessons from East Asia are very clear. It is human capital and a proactive state which makes the difference. Clearly, on human capital, we need to move much faster. If communities could be mobilized around removal of asset base to the poor households, it's time we also worked on education, health, nutrition, skills in a slightly different way. And clearly, given the interconnectedness, there was a need for what I have referred to in my writing, a decentralized approach with local governments and the countervailing presence of women's collectives which hold elected governments accountable at the local level. Now, having said that, as far as the budget is concerned, the primacy assigned in poverty reduction to what worked in the southern Indian states. The adolescent girls in high schools and higher secondary schools, higher education, decline in fertility levels, membership of SHGs, access to skill training and vocational training, the collateral-free loans to SHGs, better primary healthcare systems. What happened in the southern Indian states to explain poverty reduction faster has been attempted across the country with some successes. The Jivika in Bihar, the Mission Shakti in Odisha, the movement in Ajivika in some parts of Jharkhand where it is very active, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Rajivika, and so on. Now, having said that, in the budget, that balance, the fiscal as also the developmental, perhaps, for example, it is true that since 2014, every year at the RE stage, more money has come to MGNREGS. But it's always better to know at the beginning of the year, then you can plan things much better. When you know that you're going to get 1,10,000 crores or 90,000 crores, and this is again, if I were to look at facts, from the time when it started till 2013, each year the scenario used to be the opposite. The BE used to be higher than the RE or the actuals. Because for some reason or the other, either the money was released late or there was not enough take. But there is also a factor that rather than being a program for poverty reduction, it became a program for rural infrastructure, as we see in cases like Telangana, Andhra, Kerala, and other places. If you go to Telangana today or Andhra Pradesh today, every village you'll find solid resource management arrangements. You'll find soak pits in every household or community soak pits. You'll find a crematoria in every village. You'll find a sports field. All this has come with Narega resources. So there is no other program for rural infrastructure. The Finance Commission funds are there. But as we are aware, the last round, 15th Finance Commission, untied has actually become tied because water and sanitation is already pre-specified. It has to go there. So in the context of all this, clearly this resource is important in creating those, not just the asset base of households, but overall social, the infrastructure, which is required for a much faster pace of development. Wages is a challenge. Wage rates is an issue. The committee, which is currently examining these issues, we have covered about 8-9 states. We are covering the rest of them also. By March, we'll be there with our report. But what comes out very clearly, there is a case for converging many of these developments. There's a case for visualizing a panchayat-led development plan across the 29 sectors and across the 18 sectors in urban areas, which is much more accountable through arrangements like the social capital of women's collectives and so on, which actually then has a larger mandate to work across sectors, because in many of these, especially education, health, and other sectors, what happens in one influences what happens in the other. If learning doesn't take place in school, it need not necessarily be a school failure. It may well be an undernutrition, irreversible changes on learning. and so on. So, given these interconnectedness of these sectors, a very strong case for a local government led, and that's where the constitutional position of the 29 sectors in the 11th schedule and 18 in the 12th, given larger democratization of elected leadership because of reservation for women, because of reservation otherwise so vulnerable groups and so on, as also the emergence of the social capital of women's collectives nearly across the country today. And that perhaps explains the success in Kerala also. Kerala's success is not just a local government success, it's also a success of accountable local government, because the neighborhood household groups have been very central to the decentralization.
Yeah.
They have the Kudumsri movement now, and prior to that also the energies have had a primacy in the way local governments conducted themselves. So I think broadly with the asset deficits, it is possible to move much faster. While some gains, housing for all, yes, it does give dignity to poor households. Housing does provide dignity. The collectives of women are kept with the removal of the barriers to credit, lot more is possible. But clearly that balance perhaps a little more on what is referred to as welfare. Because again, for example, pensions for old people, for widows, it's a program with center and state both participate. In many states, the total monies are larger. But having said that, I think these are programs, given the fact, as SECC pointed out, that we had 4 crore households where there was nobody who was 25 plus and literate, which means you have a large old population which is non-literate and unskilled. If you do not provide for them a little more significantly and substantially, some of these challenges remain. So I think that getting that balance right is what I would say. While a lot of positives are there, but there could have been a few more areas where we could have moved faster.
So we'll come back to you on this, because what you're saying is very interesting in terms of how there is a case for visualizing this completely differently, the way budget allocations have been made. If I can go now to Dr. Charan Singh, and if you could talk a little bit about, your views, especially since you're a fiscal and macro expert, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Anil for getting us in, and thanks to you, Archana, for all these good questions that you're asking us. My own view is it's a very good budget. I look at it from the angle of growth. Will it be growth oriented? And what are the sectors which will push the growth? Now, if a country like India, which has a huge demographic dividend and huge female labor force participation, which is not employed and engaged, how do you really grow? And we have also in the midst of a pandemic, the worst ever pandemic in a century, we have recorded the highest growth in the world. So that means we have the potential. That means the backbone is strong, and that means the fundamentals are at the place where they should be. Given that fact, after the pandemic, now there's a war going on. So that is the pandemic first short-circuited the supply chains, and the war again has precipitated a new set of challenges. Means I myself did not know that a small country like Ukraine being attacked by a large country like Russia, and you could suddenly have problems in terms of fertilizers, in terms of wheat, in terms of oil, and this whole massive reaction that the world did in terms of sanctions against Russia and hitting themselves in the foot. And then OPEC coming in and saying that they also don't want to increase their output. So the global geopolitics was really complex, and it revealed itself in the last few months. In this scenario, having navigated the country very successfully through the pandemic, very effectively ensuring that the growth is there, ensuring that the food grains reach the people where they should, ensuring that health is assured to the migrants and everyone else, and providing free vaccination, suddenly you find yourself in a situation where, because of the war, the supply chain is totally impacted and prices are sky high everywhere. How do you now navigate the country onto its growth path and without letting it get hurt or destabilize? Keep in mind further, this is a year of elections. So the destabilizing forces from within the country and outside are going to be playing their maximum role. You are at the most vulnerable situation at this point of time. In this uncertain scenario, the budget has to be made. And the budget has to be made which will last 2 years. Now, interim budget will come, and after the next elections, again, you will have a short-term budget. But the vision, the long-term vision that can come in the budget and that provides continuity had to be held on in this year also. Given my hypothesis that this is how the budget must have been conceived, I feel the best that was possible has been attempted. I'll go in details when my turn comes next, but right now I'd simply like to say that the gross fiscal deficit, continuing on its chart of consolidation, is very impressive. Anybody else with a weak heart would have said, oh, this is the first place all economists will agree and justify, let's make it 6.4 to 6.9. But holding on to the promise and not being populist and not playing to the gallery, bringing it back to 5.9, I think is very robust. The second thing, amidst this, nothing would have gone wrong. There would have been beautiful cheers if the subsidies portion had been increased. But no, the government stood its ground and said, we are working on long-term sustainable basis, and it implies in data in terms of increased capital expenditure. Now, increased capital expenditure means multiplier effect on employment and growth, and it also means intergenerational growth impulses. That the second thing which makes me very confident about how the budget is providing continuity. The third thing, the Prime Minister has been repeatedly saying, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. In a country like ours, where 50% of the women, highly educated, very competitive, are not being provided job opportunities. And this budget goes out of the way and tries to see what it can do through the self-help groups or otherwise in ensuring that there are minimum impediments in female labor force participation. You bring them together. On youth, of course, the Prime Minister had started his initiatives earlier, and they continue with that same impetus. So as an introductory remark, I'll conclude here by saying it's a growth-oriented and a futuristic budget.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Jha, if I could request you to come in, and we will come back to you, Dr. Singh, on what you said about CapEx, a little bit more on how that, the implications of that, but if you could share your views, sir, now.
Okay, so thank you for including me in this conversation with a very, very dear friend, Amarjeet, and I also know Professor Singh, and nice to meet the fourth panelist through you. Okay, now I will take a somewhat contrarian view to what Professor Singh said with respect to the budget. I kind of endorse more or less almost entirely as regards the policy infrastructure and how things can be tweaked and made more coherent, the issues that Amarjeet was focusing on. In terms of, and I'll confine myself almost entirely to the budget, you know, sort of not really getting into lots of policy issues, etc. Now, the first thing to note whenever you look at a budget, from my point of view, is what is the fiscal space? What is the kind of, you know, fiscal envelope, so to say? Now, if you look at that, what happened between, let's say, the revised estimate for the last year's budget and what has been announced in this year. So expenditure, the size of the budget is proposed as rupees 45 lakh crores. If you look at the revised estimate for what was the expenditure in the last fiscal, it was 41.9 lakh crores, right? Both these are in nominal terms. If you adjust for inflation, what happens? Fiscal space has gone down, right? Now, which is a major concern. It has gone down, and it's a major concern precisely because there are lots of areas where there is a crying need to do lot more, even in terms of very basic, very elementary calculations. So for instance, if you look at education and expenditure there and so on and so forth, we have unfortunately never taken the idea of unit cost seriously. Why is it that, an average common kind of government school has a unit cost which is way, way, way below the central schools? Students studying there, are treated as some kind of privileged elite, right? Which is most unfortunate vis-a-vis students in general in government schools. The private schools is not an answer, right? We know it very well. We don't have time to get into these issues. So if you look at, let's say, 20 major flagship schemes, right? What do you notice? In most of these, either in real terms, the proposed expenditure is stagnant or it has gone down. Narega, we talked about. Yeah. Revised estimate, 89,000 crores. What is proposed? 60,000 crores. Right? Pradhan Mantri Krishi Samman Yojana. Right? I mean, vis-a-vis agriculture, for instance, whatever your views may be on that. Right? Certainly, this kind of handout is not the answer for increasing in a sustainable manner the income of farmers in our country. Nonetheless, whatever it was, 68,000 crores down to 60,000 crores. Okay? So, Gram Sadak Yojana.
Professor's frozen?
Looks like.
Okay.
He'll have to come in again.
Okay, he's dropped.
He lost the connection.
Yes, sir. But you're back. Please.
I'm back. Please
continue.
all right.
Yes.
Basically, this is the first major point that I'd like to make, that if we look at a whole lot of very, very important initiatives, which we often call social sector expenditure or economic sector expenditures and so on, think of the 20 most profound schemes, barring Awas Yojana, right? Awas Yojana, there has been a significant increase. Jal Jeevan Mission, there has been an increase, right? But by and large, you find the story which I have shared with you just now. Right? 2, Professor Singh talked about capex expenditure, and if you include what is also being given to the states and so on, it is actually closer to 4% of GDP and so on. So this 10 lakh expenditure, plus if you include other things there, it would be in that range. That is indeed a continuity of the intent, and the focus of this government has been for a very long time on the infrastructure and so on and so forth, last 4-5 budgets, etc. With respect to infrastructure, a very critical question is, what is the structure of that spending? If it is heavily capital intensive, where does it take you in terms of employment and other things, right? What are its multiplied linkages with various sectors? Right? Now, these issues need to be explored, investigated very carefully. My sense is that we do not have definitive answers on this. If you simply are looking at, let's say, the growth rates of the economy, and I'll actually do a longer term comparison, 1980s to the most recent ones. What has happened to labor absorption in India? Employment elasticity of output has been nosediving. There were years, 14, 15, 16, 17, when we actually moved or shifted from jobless to job loss growth. What are we going to do with that growth? Growth is good, but it has to translate into very definitive outcomes which improve people's well-being.
Yeah.
Growth fundamentalism is something which I find very difficult to subscribe to. Right? As I said, growth is good, but it must translate into a whole lot of outcomes and so on. Now, I am not getting into, very detailed nitty-gritty with respect to particular schemes, etc. There are a few good things. Right? This itself, focus on infrastructure is a good thing, right? But how do we improve linkages between, various other kinds of expenditures? How do we envision those things? Those concerns and issues need to be put on the front burner. I think, going by the record, in terms of, let's say, employment generation, etc., it has not performed very well thus far. In terms of many other kinds of positive synergies, it has worked. So, for instance, if you look at more prominent kinds of infrastructure, things have indeed improved. Right? So let me stop there. I'm looking at my watch, and I realize that I've already spoken for 6 minutes.
Yes.
So in my opening.
But it is interesting, and we will come back to you on the need of
Yes.
studying the implications and the force multipliers of the policies on infrastructure. If I may now move to Teresa. Teresa, if you could talk a bit about what your initial views are.
Sure. Thank you. So I'll speak a little bit about the market perspective on this budget. So overall, it was a balanced budget, and I think from a market perspective, the good part was there was no change in the capital gains taxation, because that could have spooked the markets. So I think no news is good news from that perspective. Overall, there's a capex focus on the budget, and that has been there, I think, at least for the last 4 years. But I would also like to highlight one aspect, that some of this is there is a on budget focus on capex. But if you look at PSU capex, there has actually been a slowdown over the last couple of years. So if I take the central government plus the PSU capex, in FY23 RE, it would probably grown by around 2%, whereas the on budget capex alone would have been 20% plus. And even going into FY24, on FY23 RE, we are looking at 37% increase in the on budget capex, whereas if I include the PSU, the capex growth comes down to around 22%. And we ourselves have done some work which shows that if you take the central government plus the PSUs, this central government capex pipeline has actually slowed, over the last couple of years, whereas we are seeing some recovery in the private sector capex, which is actually a good thing. Because ultimately the government's objective is to kind of crowd in private investment. And a lot of these private sector capex announcements have largely been in, say, in green hydrogen, green ammonia, so the green chemistries and renewable energy projects. So nearly 65% of the private sector capex announcements between April 22 to November 22 have largely been in the focused, I would say, broadly in the green energy sectors. And I think there is a huge push in the government to kind of build up this green ecosystem, which is a good thing, because globally there is a shift to net zero. Probably India is looking at 2070, but other countries will transition at a much faster pace. So if you can actually succeed in building up in this green ecosystem, India could also become a net exporter as far as green products are concerned. So I think this is an area with a lot of scope. And which we can, you could actually see, scope for growth in the maybe in the coming decades, including in EVs. So there have been a lot of incentives to kind of encourage domestic production of EV batteries. So there has been a cut in the customs duties on capital goods to produce these EVs, etc. So I think that is a good focus. But we have one area of concern as well. So I think, as the other panelists also mentioned, so broadly, if you look at capex, which is expected to grow around 37% on FY23 RE numbers, but if you look at revenue expenditure, it's expected to grow only by 1.2%, which we think is very low. And you cannot say that revenue expenditure is entirely bad. So obviously, a lot of it is going into interest payments. But if you look at schemes like Narega, etc., which is actually rural asset creation, so I think there is, it's important to focus on rural asset creation, because that's, I mean, a lot of people live in rural areas, and they, while infrastructure creation in urban areas, in railways, roads, etc., will have a long-term impact, I think the immediate multiplier is in rural asset creation. So as the economic survey itself highlights, the share of individual asset creation using Narega has gone up from 16% in, I think, in FY15 to around 73% in FY21 or FY22. So there is a lot of individual asset creation that happens on Narega. So it's not entirely, wasteful expenditure. So I think there is, it is important to actually increase your rural allocations. Even if you look at schemes like the PM Gram Sadak Yojana, which is also roads. I mean, the road allocation has gone up by around 40% if you look at the overall budget capex. But with the PM Gram Sadak Yojana, which is rural roads, it's broadly flat allocation. So I think there could have been, slightly higher allocation to rural development. Maybe we will see that through the course of the year, as I think when the other panelists mentioned. We've always seen, at least over the last couple of years, the RE numbers being higher than the BE numbers. So that may happen through the course of the year. But I think the budget could have done a little more in terms of, boosting consumption at the bottom of the pyramid, because I think rural areas and broadly the bottom of the pyramid, there have been multiple shocks. So one, you had COVID itself, and then over the last 1.5 years, there has been some rural distress because of high inflation. So rural inflation has been higher than urban inflation. And we've seen certain, like the Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, the Kharif crop has not been good. Mainly the rice Kharif crop, was significantly lower. So those areas have been hit by that as well. So a little more to alleviate rural distress, I think, could have been done. So that's overall my initial perspective.
Thanks so much. So this seems to be a very interesting thing that all of you all seem to agree on one thing, and that is that the capex going up is a positive thing. It is, but everybody seems to kind of more or less agree that more should have been done as far as rural consumption and welfare allocations is concerned. But there are a couple of things that I'd like to come back to immediately. One is, if one of you could please address this bit on the allocation of loans now, of loans being made available to states, but with caveats, with conditions on actual capital expenditure. And how does that benefit, and how does that, how will that play out in the coming year? Maybe Dr. Singh, you could go with it, and then we could come to Professor Jha with it.
I'd love to, and I'll take this opportunity, but I want to provide continuity. And because Professor Jha has raised some issues, also with the Mr. Amarjeet here, and he's been the driving person in the federal structure, he will be more equipped to answer this question, though I'll make an attempt, and he can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But I want to bring in this issue of the capital expenditure and why I'm excited about it. There are two things. I'm going to reel out some figures which will lay out the broad base, and then I will tell you how to interpret it. Now, when we talk about the capital expenditure, and I think we need to discuss it thoroughly, because it must be discussed, otherwise people will just pass it under the carpet and say another gimmick of the government. So where is the money really increasing? Gauge conversion in the railways from 3,000 to 4,600, doubling from 24,000 to 30,000. Then look at the rolling stock from 15,000 to 37,000. Now, please remember, Vande Mataram Express, just introduced, totally made in India, and running at 130 kilometers an hour. Okay, now keep moving further. Signaling and telecom, I understand it must be jobless, 2,000 to 4,000. Electrification projects, 200 to 8,000. Pure modernization. If you want a fast train between Delhi and Bombay, like the Japan's Tokyo's, you can't really run it on the track that we have right now. You really need a track which is modern and withstand that modern equipment. Then you look at other electrical works. So if you keep going on like this, road works from 74,000 to 107,000. National highways from 1,41,000 to 1,62,000. The point I'm trying to make is The capital expenditure has increased. Will it lead to jobless growth? To me, even if it brings in modernized equipment, but when I inaugurate a project from Delhi to Bombay, highly electrified roadway or the railways, just imagine between the two cities, 1400 kilometers of track is totally developed. The people get the benefit. Employment is generated, and more than employment, commerce is generated. So I think the capital expenditure, from the traditional view of can it really lead to creating hand, spade, legwork jobs to brainy jobs, that graduation has to take place for the analyst, which in my country, unfortunately, I still feel people want that Manrega expenditure should increase and I should see everybody with a spade on the shoulder walking every morning and coming back home in the evening. I want me, myself, and others to graduate from that thought. And in case there are cities like Delhi and Bombay, and in between other hubs which are created, they will create high skilled jobs. So I'm not looking for a traditional spade job now. Okay, that one point I want, and this is an argument I've seen everywhere being made, and that's why I'm very passionate about it. The other thing I want to mention is if the country has to graduate from this $2 trillion to a 5 and a 10 and a $30 trillion, the mindset has to change. And I want to just give one example and move on. I don't want to take all your time on one single question. I was in a state where a Japanese professor was meeting me, and I was a professor at IIM Bangalore. Prime Minister had just spoken about the $5 trillion economy. And he looked at me and he said, Professor Singh, are you ready for a $5 trillion economy? And I said, of course, of course. Today, I'm ready for tomorrow. He looked at me in the eye and said, Professor Singh, this is not a joke. A $5 trillion economy means each one of you has to think belonging to an economy which is 5 trillion. The $5 trillion economy will first happen in the mind, then it will translate on the ground. Right? We all have to think if we are a 5, 10, $30 trillion economy, what will be my conduct? What will be my thinking? And how will the country and the economy progress? What will be the quality of my labor? That has to be kept in mind. Now, I want to move on to the question which you posed to me. Look, my own view is, and for a long time, the thrust has to be, and I'm sorry if I don't know if Amarjeet will agree or not, but I'm of the view, many years, I've seen all concepts happen in Delhi and state governments are lagging far behind. You need to nudge them. The finance commissions have played a great role in nudging the states to start doing things. Do you know, in our country, even today, local finance statistics is not available. The Reserve Bank of India comes out with state budget articles consolidated for the whole country. I was one of the authors at initial stages. The Planning Commission at that time used to have 3 people working on state finances. The Ministry of Finance used to have 1 person. And at that time, when I was there was one IAS officer, Banerjee, who was there. Reserve Bank was a repository of state finance articles. Till today, we do not have local finance article, local finances of each state consolidated. Leave aside the country. World Bank is now funding a project in Karnataka. Maybe another 2 or 3 states are doing it. A nudge has to be provided to the states. The finance commissions were doing it earlier. GST has brought in a great transformation because all the finance ministers meet, and that also call it a federal cooperative structure or call it a nudge, but everybody's thinking together, bringing the thoughts and moving on further. The strategy through the budget that we are ready, but you need to do this part of the leg too, I think is a great strategy. It also started with doing away with cars and vehicles which are 15 years older and could be polluting, the center takes the first initiative and now wants the states to join. The Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act is a great example. It was built under Governor Bimal Jalan at the RBI, and in the government there was, I think, Yashwant Singh or Jaswant Singh. That is when it was done.
Yeah.
And then the state governments came in later, and today all the state governments have the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. So I think the center is playing its role, and rightly so, in nudging the states and saying this is the direction, keep up with it, and move in this direction. Thank you.
Mr. Sinha, would you like to come in here before Professor Jha says something? Because
no, on infrastructure and especially with regard to states, there are lessons. As was pointed out, many people who have been votaries of infrastructure have also talked about the gaps in social infrastructure, which needs attention. I'll just like to mention a few. For example, Sikkim. What did Sikkim do to become an organic state? A lot of people will be very surprised. It reconstructed its spring sheds, which gave them water, brought that water in a pipe using MGNREGS funds much before the Jal Jeevan Mission, and provided water, the piped water to every household. What else did it did? MGNREGS, every household in Sikkim has a dairy shed because we encouraged individual beneficiary schemes, and animal sheds is one of them. As a consequence, the entire organic farming, the cow dung and the cow urine is used for their agriculture. Third, cardamom plantations. And this together transforms Sikkim completely besides other things. The collective was always there. Look at Meghalaya, the Village Employment Committee, and how it goes about looking at it as a comprehensive source for village development. Not just, other funds also, housing, livelihood mission, all of it together. So I can give many examples of this, of rural infrastructure. If agricultural growth has sustained at above the 3+ over the last so many years, in spite of all the changes, I, for one, do believe it's not that we've not had bad years of rainfall, but I do believe that a lot of interventions on water conservation over time have made for a difference. The issue on infrastructure, I'd like just one last point I'd like to make. PMGSY is a very good example of it. Yeah. We have this challenge of padding of costs in infrastructure projects. And PMGSY is one project which actually managed to tackle it very effectively by involving the IITs, the NITs, by having a GIS mapping of each and every millimeter of road, by having the Indian Roads Congress give suggestions and build new technical designs, waste plastics and all. This has not percolated into very large infrastructure as yet. So there is a case for strong community connect, for your strong technological innovations also as we do, so that we get value for money. Some thrust on Urban, for example. A Urban program was started to develop clusters which had more non-formal employment. I personally feel that that needs to be pursued much faster now, because a lot of the growth models, even by way of the theories of urbanization, we are all now talking about the 25 to 50,000 population cities. They are perhaps the more efficient ones. Have we started moving in that direction is an important question. And many of the emerging towns, it's a question of leadership. Many things have to change. So infrastructure, if it has appropriate community connect, has appropriate technical evaluations to back that at every stage, it will have even better multiplier effects for many of the other sectors that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Jha?
Okay, 2 points. One, this whole question of investing or spending on infrastructure, of course, as I said right at the outset, it's a good idea, a welcome idea and so on. But as Amarjeet very well pointed out, that sort of a much better linkage between the physical and the social, and social has to take certain forms, etc. So all those are very important in figuring out what one sort of unit of expenditure can do or cannot do, the kind of bang and so on. In general, I am completely convinced that huge focus on capital intensive infrastructure is not the need of what Indian economy should strive for. The kind of linkages, etc. Yeah. I mean, suppose it takes 10 hours to travel to Mumbai from Delhi instead of 6 hours. Right? I mean, is that so important? So, I mean, this is an area where we can have a lot of debate, but I don't think we have that much time and space here. So let me not spend more time on that. I am as passionate about Narega as Professor Singh is passionate about a few things, maybe about growth and faster connectivity and so on. In fact, I would have been very happy to see Urban Employment Guarantee Program. Yeah. And I would want that sooner than later. It is nobody's case that if possible, you shift to better quality jobs. Look at the problem of educated unemployed in this country. It's not the case that they don't have skills. You're talking of 30%, 40%, right? Youth unemployment. These are huge. So it's not the case. You really have to think of the entire macroeconomic dynamics. Those who work in manual activities, it is absolutely a question of life and death for them, right? It's not the case that they're there for shall we say, any other thing but actually survival. And then if you design those activities in a better fashion, surely it can give you much more powerful bang for every rupee that you spend. So these are questions. Of course, I mean, as I'm saying that we have very different views and different takes on this. We can't sort out everything here. But in general, what I am making a plea for is much better balanced kind of growth and multiplier linkages, etc., where you take the needs and possibilities and opportunities for the 70-80% of the population, which is down the ladder. No, not only the top 5, 10, 20% or so. So how can we do that? Professor Singh has his own vision on that. I have a very different vision. Right? I don't think countries in the global south in the next 50 years can make same kind of transition from primary to secondary to tertiary, etc., that the first wave of industrializers did. It's just not possible. Look at the evidence. Right? So there are these issues. Okay, so these are deeper questions on larger trajectories of economic transformation. We can probably have some other conversation, I mean, some occasion to have these things discussed in fuller detail. Specific question that you asked. Personally, I do not like the idea of the center acting as big brother. That is not cooperative federalism. Federalism in India is under huge stress. I mean, if you simply look at what is being given to the states and the delays and all kinds of problems and so on and so forth, I mean, what was happening during the pandemic? What was happening to the GST payments, GST dues, right? The whole thing was actually becoming a coercive federalism. So I'm not persuaded at all by this logic that the center has the wisdom and the states. There are different states, right? There could be a forum where all these can be discussed properly without conditionalities. Who's the central government? Or, ideally, central government should be the union government. And union government means where everybody is treated equally. This whole hierarchy that, look, we are more knowledgeable and better off and so on and so forth in terms of wisdom is certainly not desirable. There are many states which probably are doing much better than the union government. So there has to be mechanism to work better. Certainly. That point I take very well. But not through conditionalities.
Interesting.
Let's stop there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. That is the all important points and all fair points, yours and Dr. Singh's, as well as what Mr. Sinha said. If I may bring Teresa back into this conversation a bit, since we're still talking about how certain sectors required perhaps more allocations, more attention. One of the things that caught my eye was the loans for MSMEs that were announced this year. In a year when we've seen a lot of layoffs that are happening, we've seen an economic situation which is globally very volatile. At such a time, and more people are turning entrepreneurs per force because of the economic conditions. Are the loans worth 9,000 crores? A positive thing? Should more have been done for that? And also, since we were talking about skilling and we were talking about labor and its quality, the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana's 4.0 that they talked about, and how they're building 30 new Skill India centers. Does all this, the National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme, etc., will that really make a difference, do you think?
So I'll start with the credit guarantee scheme. So basically, the 9,000 crore is the credit guarantee scheme. So actually, if we see during COVID, there was the ECLGS scheme largely for MSMEs, and that has actually worked very well, or at least it has supported loan growth to a large extent. So we've been in a situation probably over the last 1.5 years where we've seen loan growth to MSMEs grow much larger and faster than large enterprises, partially because large enterprises have done well and they have kind of deleveraged during this phase of the pandemic, whereas MSMEs actually needed the funds, and this has helped credit growth. To that extent, I still think that the credit guarantee is a good scheme and that is supporting MSMEs. I think the issue for MSMEs more is around, a lot of the regulations and the bureaucracy, which, the MSMEs find it difficult to handle because as it is, small, micro, medium enterprises, they don't have that many people on their payroll. So if a lot of your time actually goes in, handling, bureaucracy and paperwork, when you actually have the time to run your business. So I think those are the issues which need to be addressed. You need to have much more simpler process, whether it's tax payments or getting an electricity connections, or even to whatever extent the government can help to reduce the paperwork that needs to be done. And a lot is happening around digitization, and I think that reduces the human interface, and that is and that's also leading to streamlining of processes. So we're probably moving in that direction, but things could move a lot faster. So the ease of doing business needs to again, I think, work through to the bottom of the pyramid and to MSMEs. So I think that is the most crucial point. Skilling, I think that's important, and I think I think Professor Jha was mentioning about the educated unemployment in the country. A lot of the issue, I think, even around educated unemployment is that people probably have the degrees, but they don't have the right skills to kind of meet the specifications of the job at hand. To that extent, I think so probably the apprenticeship scheme and such skilling schemes will probably address the skill deficit and make people more employable. So I think those schemes are definitely good. And for MSMEs, as I said, the key issue is addressing the bureaucracy, red tape, and streamlining process.
Interesting. Thank you, Professor Jha. Or Dr. Singh, would you have something to say in terms of the announcements for MSMEs as well as skilling?
Yeah,
skilling is a very good idea. There's no question about it, But the point is, does skilling automatically translate into labor absorption? Which is where there is a great deal regarding the overall macro dynamics, which we need to understand. Yeah, the question of demand, for instance. Okay, you may be very well qualified, but there's no demand for you, right? How does that happen? How do you find those synergies, etc.? So those are the obvious issues. So as is a very old saying in those who do labor economics, yeah, that what gets cooked in the kitchen is never decided in the kitchen, right? There are lots of things happening in the macro economy. Yeah, what is happening to the product markets and lots of other issues, etc., which of course impact on it. Now, one last point. I must also tell you that it's not the case that everything is doom and gloom in this budget. I'm not saying that, right? There are a number of small initiatives which give you some direction. So for instance, transition from fossil fuels to other kinds of things, thinking about organic farming, and etc., right? So there are a number of small things, thinking about women as savers and getting support for that. So yes, but then we can't. I mean, I wanted to get into some of these details, but unfortunately, I don't have the time to get into that. So I'll stop here.
Thank you.
And I'll leave around 3 o'clock. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Dr. Singh, would you like to just quickly?
I agree with Professor Jha. The skilling and the industry have to move together. I have seen many stories where the industry has working on a plant which is latest, and the skilling center has 2 generation earlier plant. What purpose does it serve? Many times the MSMEs have told me, why can't they run Manrega through us? We will skill, and why can't the skilling budget be used through us? Well, you send us people, you call them skilled. Actually, for our machines, they are unskilled. So I totally agree with Professor Jha, the integration has to be there. I also agree with Professor Jha that the boardroom and the kitchens are different. And therefore, the boardroom for the planning and implementation and schemes may also be different. I also totally agree with him. In a federal structure, it has to be more flat. If there are good things happening in the state, the center should take it and multiply it at other places. As Amul was a great experiment, and it was also then tried, attempts were made to replicate it in terms of Verka and other places in other states. And in case there are other schemes which are being done better in one state, I think the center should also play a role in taking it. And multiple. Rurban is another very good example. Started in Gujarat, and then the government wanted it. Can it be multiplied at other places? I think that's brilliant. Nagpur, another waste management, Amul type model, is doing very well, and it should be replicated. In Sikkim, the bamboos and the way the small farmers were engaged and made productive, I think is brilliant. And I think that's exactly what the government is doing in Northeast. Look at the budgetary allocation and the 2 airports coming up in less than a month. That's exactly an attempt how to integrate and see what products from there can come into mainland India, quote unquote mainland India, and things like that. So I think in a federal structure, it has to be far more cooperative, and I thought it's being done.
Thank both of you. I understand both of you all have to go, but if I could just take 1 minute and bring it back to Mr. Sinha before we wrap up this discussion, considering he is he is the person to speak to for suggesting the structural reforms that we want from Manrega. And if I may quickly also put in a word for Manrega that I read recently, which was extremely interesting, where nature-based solutions, most of which globally came from India. Most of the work that was done on the ground happened in India because of Manrega, according to an ILO report. It's almost 80% of all NBS work happened in Manrega. So if we could wrap up with your words, sir.
No, I think budget is only a roadmap, but the detailing of it, and one can't agree more. If states and local governments don't own an initiative, it never takes off. And a lot of the learning is both sides. We have to have platforms which allow for that. And two, I think, it's also time. We've been talking about it, but we need to give it a chance, and that holds for Manrega as well. Any restructuring that we think today, it has to be seen in terms of a convergent working. And we've tried convergence all our lives. It doesn't work like that unless and until you are actually able to delegate funds, functions, and functionaries at the levels where they are needed. We are better positioned today than we were earlier. As I said, on account of a large number of community institutions of the poor, which have also come up during this period across the country. Bihar, for example, Jivika. It makes all the difference in things moving faster. That being the case, I am a strong votary for the skills or education or livelihoods or health for many of these sectors. It's time we got back to the local government again. And in urban areas, my plea has been one reform which I've been pushing for many years. An urban ward in a large municipal corporation is 30,000 to 3 lakh population. You can't have communitization at that level. You need a Basti level elected leader there. And the constitution doesn't come in the way. So I'd only end by saying a lot of the reform in many of the programs has to do with this partnerships getting stronger, more organically linked to each other at the local level. And there will be huge value for money and savings if we start working together at that level. What nutrition does and what schools do, what health does and what livelihoods does, forestry, plantation, so many things, There is a case for those 29 sectors actually to be at that level. We will get much more from the same amount of money. The governance changes because these are sectors which are mired in center state, आधा हम देंगे, आधा वो देंगे, and it doesn't take off. Educational health, this is the biggest problem. Health is a state subject, education has become a concurrent subject, but that doesn't take away the fact that the bulk of the organization of these systems are at the state level. And we really need to work together. A lot of both the recurring as also the capital expenditures have to be thought together. Minus that's only possible if you have a horizontal institution of a local government which provides a means. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. This was absolutely wonderful. And thanks, Archana. Thanks, Policy Circle, for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.